Chapter 7. The Fagot Retreat. 1529 A.D. "I wonder how much money Mother will get tomorrow," I said to Stephen. "Tomorrow is Hoke Day." "Tuesday is Hoke Day," disputed Stephen. "Tuesday for the men, but tomorrow for the women," I corrected him. "I wonder how much money Mother will get tomorrow." "The priests will want her to get a great deal," answered Stephen. It was 2 weeks after Easter, and it was the custom that when Hocktide came, the women would take cords and go out into the streets and roads and stop all the men who passed, and bind them with the cords, not loosing such prisoners till they had paid a little amount of money. The men, on another day, would take cords and treat the women in the same way. It was rude sport, but the money gained in this way was given to the priests as an offering to the church. There was a supper, and Stephen and I liked the merriment. But my father, who grew, it seemed, daily more uneasy under the rule of the priests, had said lately that he could wish that my mother would not raise any money in this way on Hoke Day. But my mother laughed lightly at his misgivings and warned him that if he were not brisk this Hocktide, she would be more successful than he in getting money. My father smiled at her merry tone, though his eyes looked distressed. My father did not intend to raise any money for the priests this Hocktide. I think my mother knew that very well. She spoke light-heartedly enough, but she was really in dread of what the priests would say, and she strove to make up by her own unusual zeal the lack of interest that my father showed. She hoped to ward off the displeasure of the priests for a time longer, and yet I believe she felt a thrill of terror, thinking that she could not always continue to shield her husband. But she did help the other women get much money for the priests that Hocktide. It was a number of months after this when my father became aware that the priests strongly suspected him. It was little wonder, for my father had absented himself from service, not going to matins or mass or vespers, and never more making confession to the priest. No marvel that fierce eyes were on my father, and mischief was plotted against him. "I must go into hiding," I overheard my father tell my mother one night after I was in bed. My aunt and Stephen were gone away at this time on a pilgrimage, with some others, to see the relics at the Shrine of Reading, and I think my father thought that he would do better to hide while she was away, so that if necessary his place of concealment might be a secret to her even. For my aunt was more obedient to the priests and more under their control than my mother, and though my aunt liked my father very well, yet there was no telling whether if he were hiding and she knew the place where he was hidden, and a priest should command her to tell where it was, she might not obey. My aunt had been zealous over her pilgrimage, and she had urged us to go too. For at Reading, people said there were many, many relics, bits of the arms of St. Pancrates, St. Quentin, St. David, Mary Salome, and St. Edward the Martyr, and a bone of Mary Magdalene. "I must go into hiding," repeated my father. "The priests suspect me." "Oh, Ralph," begged my mother, "give up the testament. It will lead you into trouble. It has led so many to death. The priests will never stop hunting you once they really begin. Give up the testament. Think of Editha. Think of me. How can we live without you? The priests will kill you. I hear dreadful things from the neighbor folk of how matters go elsewhere. I am afraid for you all the time. Let me burn the book, and do you go to church and to confession as you used to. Do not be an Anabaptist. Oh, do not. I am afraid for you. She wept softly, and he tried to soothe her. You were not shriven at Hocktide, she sobbed. If you had only gone to the priest then, penance might have saved you. Oh, Ralph, I have prayed so much to the saints for you. She tried to check her sobs.
Poor little wife. Poor mistaken little wife, murmured my father brokenly. If you only knew.
Even now, urged my mother, if you should go to the priest and confess everything, he would forgive you. If you did penance, I am sure he would. Will you not go, Ralph? I listened to hear what my father would reply. Perhaps I ought not to have listened. But, child though I was, I had heard neighbor Eld and my father discuss the Church of Rome enough so that I know my father could never be an honest papist again, as he had once been. There was a long silence, till my father spoke, his voice yet trembling.
I have confessed my sins to God, replied my father, and I have absolution through Jesus Christ our Lord.
I could hear my mother sobbing and pleading for a long while, and my father answering her kindly, and yet I knew that he had not changed his decision. By and by, father came softly to my bed, and knelt down and kissed me gently, as if he was afraid of waking me. But I was wide awake, and I put my arms around his neck, and he said,
Good night, Editha. Father is going to hide in the big faggot pile, and you must not tell anybody where he is.
Are you going to take the Testament? I questioned, trying to see his face in the dark.
Yes, he answered. I have it. Goodbye, Editha.
And then he almost sobbed as he murmured,
Oh, Editha, Editha, may I live to see a testament in every home in England, and all the wee ones, like my own little girl, free to read it.
He kissed me again and went away. There was a great quantity of faggots heaped up a little back of our house, and during the night my father constructed a kind of hollow hiding place inside the large pile. In this place he hid, having taken with him some food and clothes, together with his New Testament. After this, sometimes by night, I would climb the pile of faggots and hide in the big hole with father, whispering to him all the news I could remember. He had fixed the faggots over his head so that his hiding place was well concealed. Once, in the daytime, I was near the large pile getting a few faggots for mother to burn when suddenly one of our priests appeared near me.
Did your father go with your aunt and the others on the pilgrimage to the Grey Friars at Reading?
He asked. And when I tremblingly answered, No, the priest looked sternly at me and hesitated.
He went not on that pilgrimage?
Questioned the priest, transfixing me with his piercing gaze.
But he is not at home. I have not seen him in the village. He went not on that pilgrimage?
No, I said, trembling so with fear that I could hardly keep from bursting into tears. Then the priest went away as swiftly as he had come. I had expected that he would climb the big faggot pile and find Father. I knew better than to climb the faggot pile myself in the daytime, even though the priest had disappeared. But I dropped my 2 faggots and ran into the house and told Mother what had happened. After this, my father began to think that perhaps we might try to escape from England, as so many other folks were attempting to do. But we hardly knew how to accomplish it, and we knew that King Henry could send and take us, even if we fled from his realm. Oh, I thought, I wish we could fly as well as the one-winged angel did. Then we could fly safely out of England some night, and Father could carry his testament with him, and no one would ever know where we went. This exceedingly impossible childish wish exercised my imagination a great deal, but was of no practical avail. It was in this year that King Henry published a proclamation against the Gospelers, with a list of English books that were forbidden. When my father heard of it, he repeated something that William Tyndale said once about perceiving by experience, how that it was impossible to establish the lay people in any truth, except the Scriptures were plainly laid before their eyes in their mother tongue. My aunt and Stephen came back from their pilgrimage, and in my hearing, my aunt said not a word about my father's disappearance. My mother must have said something to my aunt, but I did not know what. If Stephen had been like some boys, I should have been afraid of his finding out about Father's being in the faggot heap. But Stephen was not a boy to do much discovering. He was a very dreamy sort of a person, and would rather watch pilgrims come to and go from the shrine of our town, and listen to the tales they told, and note the wonder at our one-winged angel, than be prying around our faggot pile. Stephen was much delighted with the pilgrimage that he and his mother had made to reading, and he told me of having seen the monument of the first King Henry at the abbey of that place. A woman pilgrim there told me a story, Stephen informed me. She said there used to be a man that the first King Henry made a prisoner, and the king was angry because the man had written some verses that laughed at the king. And King Henry was so wicked that he said the man's eyes must be put out. And when they were doing it, it hurt so that the man hit his head against the prison wall and it killed him. Cousin Editha, would our King Henry put out a man's eyes? I don't know, I answered, remembering some of the dreadful things that Dame Burnett had mentioned. But Stephen had already turned to another idea. Cousin Editha, he asked, don't the saints want their arms any more? I don't know, I repeated. There were so many arms of the saints at the Grey Friars, went on Stephen. I suppose the saints left their arms there for the friars to take care of. I said nothing. I was a little envious that Stephen should have seen so much more than I had, but I reflected that at least Stephen had never seen a New Testament, and I had, although I dared not boast of that to Stephen, to offset his tales of what he had seen on his pilgrimage. I reflected, furthermore, that I knew about the Anabaptists, and Stephen did not know. I was certainly a great deal wiser than he about them, for my father had told me all he knew about the persecutions the Anabaptists had endured, and how such people loved and read the New Testament, and believed that no king has a right to take God's word from the common classes of men who need it so much. But I sighed as I thought that I must keep silent about all my knowledge, and so had nothing wise wherewith to amaze Stephen, though he would have been amazed indeed if he had known what my father said to me one night in the Fagot hole, when he had been telling me what the Anabaptists had endured in the past in our country and in other lands.
"Editha," whispered my father, "the Anabaptists have had a glorious history in the past. They will have a glorious history in the future. Oh, my child, shall not you and I be worthy of that history? Shall we not do our part in the struggle for religious freedom? It will come some day, Editha. This freedom we Anabaptists want for all men. Then no man will have to hide in a faggot pile because he reads the New Testament and believes that none but those who have repented and believed should be baptized. Then every man shall be at liberty to worship God as he thinks right. Editha, I know that day of freedom will come, and I am proud to think what part the sacrifice of Anabaptist suffering and toil, yea, the sacrifice of Anabaptist lives themselves, will have in bringing freedom to the world.
The end of Chapter 7.